over to you.
All right, we good to go then?
All good. All you, Sarah.
All right. Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the first Daily Collegian AIG Roundtable of the semester. I'm Sarah Pellis. I'm a senior majoring in digital print journalism here at Penn State. I'm one of the lifestyle editors here at the Collegian. I'm so excited for the lineup of journalists we have here tonight and for them to talk to us. And let me introduce our panelists for this evening. Mike Abrams is the Director of Journalism Practices and Principles for the New York Times, where he has been an editor since 2004. He runs training programs, recruits and evaluates editing candidates, collaborates on style book changes, and contributes to standard reviews, sensitive news coverage. And before the Times, Mike was an editor and reporter at the newspapers in Virginia and Pennsylvania. At Penn State, he was a 4-year member of the Daily Collegian and served as editor-in-chief in the 1993 to 1994 academic year. He and his wife, Rebecca, met while working at the Collegian, and they have two kids and a dog. So say hi to Mike, everybody. Scott Dodd is an editor on the national desk of the New York Times. He was previously a reporter for the newspapers in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, and an editor for magazines and digital media. He also worked for the Daily Collegian. He's sitting in a hotel courtyard. I love it. I love it. Jenny Vrentas is a sports reporter for the New York Times, focusing on enterprise and investigations. She came to the Times from Sports Illustrated, where she covered the NFL for more than 8 years. She spent 6 years at the New York Star-Ledger, where she was the beat reporter for the New York Giants in 2012, and the New York Jets from 2010 to 2011. And from 2003 to 2006, she was the Daily Collegian staffer, including positions such as a football writer in 2004 and a sports editor in 2006. She's a native of State College, PA. She received a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and molecular biology from Penn State in 2006 and a master's degree from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism in 2007. Thank you all for joining us today. That was a long-winded introduction, but my first question for you guys is, why journalism? Why are you here? Why go into this profession? What will keep us going into this profession? That's my big question. It's kind of big, but it's something I'm really interested in hearing from you guys. Whoever wants to start first.
Why don't you go in alphabetical order, Mike?
Okay, definitely.
That would be your first.
Definitely.
Why journalism? That's a good question. I think they pay you to find out stuff that other people want to know and talk about, and that's your job. You get to do that. That's what started for me, that curiosity. Hey, I want to find out what's being built there, or why that policy was put into place, or why something was going wrong, and getting people to answer those questions and then convey it in a way that doesn't matter whether it's a podcast or a regular article or whatever it is. It's pretty cool to be able to share that kind of stuff and have people talk about it.
Scott, what about you?
Yeah, so, Mike and I overlapped at the Daily Collegian. We were there the same 4 years. So I think in some ways my experience was kind of similar, except that I didn't make it on staff the first semester. And I went with my roommate to the tryout, not really like knowing what it was, not terribly interested in it. And I didn't get on staff. And so then after that, I was like determined, obviously I'm going to come back and I'm going to do this. But once I started doing it, those same sort of things drew me to it, that, just being able to walk up to anybody that you wanted and to ask a question, to just be curious about anything and to follow it down. Mike said they pay you to do that, but they don't pay you very much. So you really do have to have a real drive and to really care about sort of learning about things and telling the world the things that you learn. And ultimately, I think you get to do some good, hopefully by whether it's exposing wrongdoing or, finding out things that people need to know. And I don't think there are many professions where you can sort of feel at the end of the day, I did some good today. And that's a nice feeling.
That's exactly why I want to go into it. So that's great to hear. Jenny, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, maybe the reasons have kind of evolved over time. I was a science major at Penn State, so I just started writing for the Collegian for fun. I'd always liked writing. I thought it would be a fun activity to do. And it was also really cool to like create something that, you know, you could pick up on campus. I know that there's probably less actual physical copies these days to pick up. Everyone's reading it on their phones. But when I was in school, it was still like you'd walk into Thomas Building or Willard and everyone would be picking up a copy of the Daily Collegian. And I know it's the same thing now, just a different delivery. And then I think over time, I really have felt strongly about the public service aspect of journalism. And I think that's what continues to keep me going now. You know, as Scott just said, like you find out things that maybe can make the world a better place or inform the public, or if you weren't doing this work that maybe nobody would know. So I think, and the Times is a great place for that. I mean, that's the core of what we do. And there are so many people doing that across the newsroom that it's really motivating. And yes, Courtney, I do still see the physical copies. So whenever I go home, my mom will actually, you know, I think she gets the mail subscription as well. So she saves them for me. So I know there is still a print copy. Thank you for pointing that out.
Definitely, we still print. That's one of our big aspects of our papers still. You guys kind of added to this like when you were talking, but what were your experiences like at the Collegian? What did you take advantage of the most?
I guess we're going in the same order.
Doesn't matter, whoever wants to blurt it out. So
for me, it was the idea that although you have advisors and people you can ask for advice, you're there with your peers on your own, making decisions every day. And to me, that was like way more valuable than any class I took, even the best classes I had. And it made me a better student in those classes. One, you learned time management. Two, you had access to other people to pick their brains to help you do your work for classes sometimes. But mostly it was the idea that you're working without a net and it's real and it matters. And students react and get angry about coverage or happy, or they change their lives because of it. And you can't replace that kind of experience.
definitely. What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say similarly, I think there are probably very few student activities out there where you're actually doing every day pretty much the same job that you're going to do after you graduate. So, you know, I mean, when I graduated and went on to work at newspapers, you know, the job was pretty much the same thing as what I'd been doing at the Collegian. You know, there were obviously differences in it and things like that, but you know, you really felt like, you know, okay, I understand what this profession is. You know, I'm doing it every day, and if I enjoy that and I like it, you know, and I'm going to go on and continue to do it, you know, when you get into a newsroom, it's like you've already had that experience and that sort of like on the ground, you know, like education and what your profession really is, versus I think a lot of what you know, a lot of other things that you can do just don't give you that same sort of thing that you can get in journalism and by working at the Collegian. So
Jenny, what about you?
I would echo a little bit of both what Mike and Scott said. I think I have such fond memories of being at the James Building, which I know does not exist anymore, but you basically there's just such a rare experience to be able to produce something that's like serving the college community and to be doing it with your friends. Like the hours that we spent at the Collegian office, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you, like it was so much work, but it also was just so thrilling that it never felt like a chore. Like I was always racing from my classes or the science lab to get to the Collegian because I just wanted to spend time in the newsroom and the energy there. And I never through college, I spent my summers working in science labs. I didn't actually do any internships, but I didn't feel far behind because I had this great experience at the Collegian and, you know, covering the football team. You're basically a beat reporter alongside people who are beat reporters for professional newspapers. So that was really empowering and really, you know, prepared me for what would come in my career.
Definitely. No, I remember the James building when I tried out when I was a wee freshman, and then when they knocked it down. So definitely that, I definitely resonate with that. And I bet a lot of us do too, especially that. So besides the experiences I mentioned about you guys and the collegiate experiences, what experiences got you to where you are today? Like, tell us like how you got here a bit, if you could.
I started out at a really small Gannett paper in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, if anybody knows where that is,
Yeah.
covering tire fires and council meetings. There was an SPCA debate over money, I think. I remember sitting outside the meeting, they wouldn't let me in, and it was like my first experience of the government shutting you out, except it was an organization, shutting me out. And I even had to go to a fair once and cover cow patty bingo. Does anybody know what this is? Like when you buy a
That's
square and then wherever the cow drops it, you win. Try coming up with a newspaper story on that. But then in all seriousness, after that, I went to York, Pennsylvania, where Scott was working already. We were beat reporters together and learning how to cover a beat and how to work sources and come up with stories that, and there it was a 2 newspaper town. So you're competing with another reporter on your beat or multiple reporters. And that was a lot of fun. And then kind of went up the old chain, which doesn't really exist anymore. The idea that you go to a slightly larger paper after that, and then a bigger one after that. And at some point I went to the Poynter Institute for a training seminar for managers and mid-level managers. And one of the faculty people was from the New York Times, and we were going out for drinks afterward with the group, and I just cornered him, and I'll swear here because this is what I said to him. I said, "What is it like to work at the fucking New York Times?" And he just got this huge grin on his face. And when I got back to work, there was a little note just said, "If you're ever interested, ... Now, it wasn't that easy. There was a tryout process and tests, and it took many, many months after that. But I think I got to the New York Times in part because I was willing to swear to the guy who worked there.
Yeah, that's my big question all the time. Like, how do you get like that? So, Scott, what about you?
Well, so it's funny because, obviously Mike and I started together. I went to, after York, where he and I worked together, I went to the Charlotte Observer, where I spent 8 years. I covered county government, sports for a while. And then I was a general assignment breaking news reporter, basically just doing sort of like, A1 stories on whatever the big news of the day was. And while I was in Charlotte, they went from being a Knight Ridder paper to a McClatchy paper, and McClatchy started to have bankruptcy problems and layoffs and things like that. Or I guess the layoffs came first, and then they started heading toward bankruptcy problems. But it was pretty clear that like the news industry was, not a safe place to be. Not that it had been for a while. So I decided I'd like explore some other things. I moved to New York and did a fellowship at Columbia in science and environmental journalism. And then I worked for magazines for a while and at an online news outlet. And was kind of, looking for stability and thought maybe it was in nonprofit news or maybe it was in something else. And this was a time when, as Mike will tell you, the Times even was on like shaky footing and things like that. But, a few years ago, I had left like another news outlet, and it just, I was like, well, maybe it's time to try the Times. So I knew Mike and I knew a couple other people who I got in touch with, and they helped me sit down with one of the top hiring editors, and I got lucky. I did the same thing that Mike did. I did the tryouts, and they don't do a tryout anymore, but they do a test that sort of simulates the tryout. And so I did that, and did well. They hired me on as what they call a flex editor, which is somebody who could sort of like move around and do different things in the newsroom. I spent some time working on the national desk, and then the national editor hired me onto the national desk where I've been. So I've been at the Times for a little over 4 years now, and feel very lucky that I wound up in one of the few sort of like stable, thriving places in journalism, because it's really not easy to find any of those places anymore. And I've I went through a lot of experiences trying to find that, only to wind up back in a newspaper, which I didn't think was going to be where it was, but this one may be one of the few. So.
Yeah, Jenny, I saw you said it looks kind of easy for sports. What can you say about your experience cleaning up?
Well, yeah, I didn't have to go through a tryout, but I think Mike is right. Like there's edit tests, and I think for reporters, it's usually you submit your clips, and I had to submit story ideas, and all of that. But so I started at the Star Ledger, and I had an internship with through the Association for Women in Sports Media after I went to grad school after Penn State, which I will say, like, 10-month master's program did not come anywhere close to the Collegian experience. So don't be fooled by like fancy master's degrees. Like, it's not the same as the Collegian experience. And then, Scott referenced like the turbulence of the industry, and, the Star Ledger was going through a lot at that time. Basically ever since I've been in the industry, that's been a constant, I think that's something to be open and honest about. Like, it's important to share, but also, we love the work that we do, so that keeps us going. But there were a lot of buyouts, reporters who'd been at the paper for a long time, that opened up opportunities for younger people on staff. So I stayed on. Like, I was a year-long intern at first, making like $35,000 a year, living in New York. I was still living in New York, so I'd gone to Columbia, and so like, I mean, it's not that workable, right? But then I ended up covering the Giants and the Jets. I mean, I would say like most of the opportunities kind of like happened because of just like a certain thing that you didn't think was going to make a difference at the time. So, I started covering the NFL, becoming an NFL beat writer, because the Giants had gone to the Super Bowl, the 2007 season, and I was like the 8th reporter of 8 that they sent. And I did like this scene blog, which, was just kind of a crummy assignment, but I was just like, hey, I'm at the Super Bowl, I'm going to do a really great job at the scene blog. So I went all over Arizona. They wanted me to cover like what was going on at the parties, and like what was going on like at the charity events, and like where were players making appearances, and like I just drove all around Arizona. I did this little scene blog. And then when there was an opening to be the backup Giants writer the next season, the Giants beat writer was like, well, Jenny like worked really hard on the scene blog. Like, why don't we give her a chance? So that was just kind of like a random thing that happened that you sort of don't know. Like, even if the assignment you get is a crummy one, sometimes it can help lead to something else if you still take it seriously. And then my job at Sports Illustrated, I was hired by Peter King. He was starting an NFL vertical at SI called the Monday Morning Quarterback. And he was living in Montclair, New Jersey. So he was a Star Ledger subscriber and had read my coverage of the Jets, and had reached out about a few feature stories I had done. So when he set out to hire the staff, that connection kind of led to that. And then, at the Times, it's actually kind of random. Like, there was an opening last year, and the editor who reached out, Oscar Garcia, he's a deputy sports editor. We had like sat together on a panel together in 2018, maybe. It was like it was at Penn, not Penn State, sorry. But it was at Penn, and it was like a sports business summit, and they had like a sports journalism panel. So I had like met him there, and we had loosely kept in touch. And then when they had this opening, he reached out and, said that he had thought of me. And so that kind of gave me confidence to apply for the job. I had seen the opening, but I honestly wasn't sure that I was going to apply, because like, it's the New York Times. Like, I don't know, could I really get a job at the New York Times? But when he reached out, I was like, all right, I guess I will apply, because now someone there has reached out. So I've been here since January.
That's fantastic. That's good to hear. And from like all that you guys said, I can tell that networking is really important. What can you guys say to that? Because I don't think a lot of us know a lot about it. I didn't know a lot about it, like going into this now senior year. I'm like, I want to network more and talk with more people. So how important is that?
I mean, the networking is important, but a couple of things that both Scott and Jenny said, and I know this was important for me too. I think impact in the work you do is more important.
Yeah,
If
definitely.
you do great work along the way, or you show, like for instance, if you're on the crummy assignment and you make it something other than crummy, or you're a part of a team reporting something and you're just really helpful to those around you, that's to me just as important, as that is part of the networking. And then when you have those moments that come along, whether you're at a conference or you're meeting friends for drinks, you sort of use those moments to advance things a little bit. But the networking really takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, and people forget you, or they're busy. To me, it's more important, like focusing on the work. We all have parts of our jobs that we don't like, that we have to do, and you have to learn to do those quickly and efficiently so that you can carve out time for really meaningful work that's going to have impact.
Yeah, I'd say I'm actually a pretty terrible networker, but I'm lucky that I've worked with enough good people over the course of my career that I just have connections at a lot of places, and so it's less about like going to events like with the intention of like passing around your resume or looking to. I mean, you shouldn't pass up the opportunity to ask somebody a question the way that Mike did at Pointer. But you're also, if you go into it with a sense that like, I'm here because I want to work my way up the ladder or something like that, I don't know how well that really works. But for me, what has worked is like, I've always tried to help people out whenever they reach out to me, when they need a connection or when they, are trying to figure out, what's next for me, or who do I get in touch with, or, things like that. And, that I think that what goes around comes around is true. And like, if you try to be, a good helpful connection to people, if you, try to support people in their careers, like when you need that help, you'll find it, so you might not know where it's going to come from, but you'll find it. And that's what's always, sort of helped me, but you also can't be afraid to reach out when that time comes and to say, I do need that, help, or I need that introduction or whatever, because, people are going to be willing to do that for you. If you've shown that you can do the work and that you're serious about it and things like that. So, but sometimes you have to be the one to reach out and say, it's my turn. I need the help now. So,
Definitely.
yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Jenny, what about you? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I mean, first of all, you guys are all on the Zoom tonight, and, Sarah, you're doing a tremendous job leading this panel. And like, I think all of that is networking and it's important. But I really agree with what Mike said. Networking does not come naturally to me. And I know, like, as a journalist, you're like supposed to be somebody that like talks freely to everybody in the world and can make connections. But like, I like really struggle at like self-promotion or like putting myself out there in like networking type settings. And I do think like the work is the most important thing. I mean, yes, there are times when you have to take initiative and, apply for a job maybe you don't think you would get. Although I'm a bad example because I was not going to apply for the Times job until somebody suggested that I did. But I mean, there are times when I think it is important to take those steps. But I also think it is, the work is the foundation of things. And I think, if you're doing good journalism and you have, good practices and you're, committed to making the extra call or trying to produce something that's a little bit different than is out there. I mean, I really think that's what we're all trying to do as journalists. And I think that's really the key to any assignment that you take on, is try to, contribute something different to the conversation that isn't already there. And I do think that is what gets stories noticed more when you make the effort to do that.
definitely. Zach, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. For Jenny, but she kind of answered it already. My question was just going to be, how did you separate yourself in kind of the football world? Because in America, football is like maybe the most competitive area, at least definitely in sports writing. It feels like everyone wants to do it. So how did you maybe set yourself apart in that area?
Yeah, it's a really good question because you're right. You know, I always would hear stories when I worked for Peter King about how in the 80s there were like 5 people at the NFL Combine, or like, you know, there just wasn't the same competition for access, you know, in previous decades. And now it's so oversaturated because everyone, you know, football is such an enormous part of the, you know, society of our country, right? So I think sort of what I just said is kind of the example, or is the advice I got from somebody early on when I was on the Giants beat. It was like, just do like something extra every day, like make one extra phone call, or try to get a player one-on-one in the locker room, or come up with a story idea, you know. And those like little things, like sometimes they seem hard at first, but then one works out. Like you call somebody's coach and they tell you an incredible anecdote, and then it sets your story apart, and sort of gives you confidence to do that moving forward. And I think now at this point in my career, I think I've really tried to focus on enterprise and investigations, because that is something that is still underrepresented in the football coverage space. I think that there aren't a lot of outlets that have the resources or give the reporters the time and space to do that kind of work. The New York Times definitely does. And so I feel like there's almost a responsibility, if you are at a place where you have those resources, to take that work on. But also, like, it's a place where like there's a lot of like new ground to break. I mean, I spent most of the last year and a half covering the story about Deshaun Watson and the sexual misconduct accusations against him. And I can't tell you how many times there were people I called that were like, you're the first person who's ever tried to reach me, and I have a story and an experience to share. And like, you never get that covering the NFL. Like, you're generally like fighting for 5 minutes of somebody's time. You know, you're trying to get one interesting answer out of a player that's giving you platitudes in like a 3-minute interview. You know what I mean? So that was kind of eye-opening, that like, wow, there are a lot of stories that you just have to like be willing to look in different places or do different kind of reporting, maybe than others in the industry are doing.
Yeah, definitely. I've not seen a lot of like NFL like investigative coverage, and that's really important that you're doing that. It's really like admirable, definitely. And I have a lot of different questions, so we'll just open it up to questions. So Daniel, go ahead. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, he'll type it out for you guys and we can get back to it. Sam, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I just was wondering if you guys could talk about like how the industry, like it's very obvious that the industry's changed a lot. A lot of things now are done on social media. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find a job, obviously. Like, what would your advice be in regard to just the changing aspect of the industry?
I guess I'll start with that. I would say one, I mean, there are still a lot of jobs. It depends what you want to do. I think first figuring out what you want to do and what you're good at is the first step. And then figuring out who's doing that well and set that as sort of your goal. But you're probably going to have to chip away at getting to what you really want. So there are lots of jobs in audience, editing and writing for social media, for main accounts, for desks like the one Scott's on. You know, jumping right away to a place like the Times is not really realistic for most people coming out of college. We do have early career programs that are highly selective, and you know, you're talking about, it's almost like a lottery ticket. So that's 5 or 10 years down the road for a lot of people, but there are a lot of other almost every publication that's thriving, whether it's a nonprofit news organization, something like the American Journalism Project. Several of the organizations that work for that organization are doing really interesting things in what, you've probably studied news deserts, the idea that local publications have dried up and these nonprofits are popping up, even to the point where new kinds of coverage happen on text messages. They're not even being blasted to everyone at the same time. And so I do think there are jobs out there, but I think the first thing I would say is, what do you want to do? What are you good at? And then start setting your sights on places that do those things.
Definitely. And from Daniel, he couldn't speak at all, unless Scott has anything to say about the question that Sam said. Sorry.
One thing that I was going to throw out there is, I was primarily a breaking news reporter, and now I work on a lot of breaking news stories, and the national desk uses stringers all over the country, and increasingly a lot of big papers do that because we are covering more and more of what feel like, in a lot of ways, local stories, and we need people on the ground who know the communities we're writing about. Sometimes it's a lot of legwork and there's not a lot of glory to it, but we do try to make sure that people get, bylines and, and get recognition for what they do. So if that is something that you're interested in, I think that increasingly there are places that, and if you're, from or familiar with a place that is one of those news deserts or does not have a lot of like national coverage right now, doing some local reporting and getting on the radar of some of the bigger publications that might reach out to you about being a stringer, or reaching out to somebody at one of those publications and saying, I'm interested in that. That is an option. I mean, it's a way that big publications are trying to fill in some of the holes in coverage out there. Again, it's not glamorous, it's not well paid, but it can get you experience sometimes.
Definitely. Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would add is, I think it's really important to be open to different ways of doing journalism. Just from the time that I graduated Penn State in 2006 to now, like, the media landscape has totally changed. There wasn't Twitter. When I covered the football team in 2004, like, we would write a web story that would maybe like be posted the next day. There weren't podcasts or video or any of those things. So you can see like the incredible transformation. And I think you have to be willing to be open to explore new ways of delivering information. And, there's a lot more non-traditional media outlets now that offer opportunities. And so sort of being open-minded at the different places where you can work. And then I think another thing too, is there has been like a real revitalization of the media unions, including at the New York Times, and that our News Guild of New York, represents most of the largest publications in the New York area. And I think that's so important to like raising standards in the industry. Like, when I was at Sports Illustrated, one of the things we fought for was a $64,000 salary floor, right? So it's like, I don't want people to be making $35,000 and trying to live in New York like I did 15 years ago. So I'm hopeful that like we can continue to raise standards for people like you guys when you're entering the industry, that, your paths will not be as hard. And yes, the industry is still shaky, still figuring out, digitization, the monetization of digital journalism has been an ongoing challenge, but I think different companies are finding ways to do that successfully. And I think we're also like gaining more strength as workers so that this can be a more stable job, and that there's a lot of places you work where there can be, you can make a decent pay and have decent stability.
Definitely. I've seen it from some places as well. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I don't know if someone was trying to talk, but Daniel sent his question in the chat, but how do you improve your writing and continue to find different angles, stories to write for the New York Times? Mike kind of answered it well. If you want to say anything else, you can say it too. This is open to any of you panelists. So
the only thing I would add to that, if you do really want to work at the Times one day, one thing to keep in mind is how you act on social media, what you do in your life. Those are all things that can come back later on when people are looking to hire you. You should just be starting to decide, if you really want a serious journalism career, then think about, where does activism end and journalism begin? Or where, if you're interested in politics and you want to write, maybe that's a good career to go into. Not, in other words, you have to decide what kind of writing you want to do and how you want to apply it. If you want to be at the Times, then, down the road, that we cover things. We aren't part of the story. We aren't part of the protest. And that can be really difficult when all your friends are on campus going to something and wanting to be a part of something. And so it's not to say that if you have already done those things, you can't sort of undo them, but you be aware of. That's something I think Jenny said it earlier, are you following best practices along the way? Is your sourcing solid? Are you quoting people accurately? Are there a lot of corrections on your work after publication? Everybody makes mistakes, but the more fundamentals you get right and the more you build on top of those, the better position you'll be down the road for, big things.
Mhm. Scott,
Just to,
go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, it's fine. I would address real quick the question about like improving your writing and things like that. Obviously the number one thing that you have to do is just write. The more that you write, the more opportunities you have to improve and things like that. But Mike and I and Jenny, to some extent, we're lucky enough to start off in places that taught you how to write and helped you get better, and had really good reporters and editors who could be mentors and things like that. Again, I think it can be very hard in this day and age to find those kind of places. And so I think the more that if it really is your goal to continue to improve and grow and stretch as a journalist, it's all the more vital to try to find places that are going to let you have those mentors, those teachers, that will help you improve, because it's very hard to do it on your own. Some people have and some people do, but but for the most part, you need people who you can work with. And so prioritizing that over, sometimes there may be something that may be more high profile or maybe more glamorous, but you're not going to have anybody to learn from. And I think that it's important to know that matters a lot.
That's good to
Yeah.
hear.
And I would just add, I think, Mike referenced this, but I like him constantly looking at how other people do stories. Like if you see a story that you are like awed by, maybe that person is on a podcast, or, I'll just maybe go through the story and like, where was this sourced from? How do you think they got this information? And maybe all the details of how they did the reporting isn't in the story. But I mean, for me, like starting to cover, or starting to do investigative work, like I listened to the audiobook of She Said, which was written by Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. And I can't tell you enough, like how instructive that was for me. Like even listening to that, like 15 years into my career, I learned so much from it that I then applied to reporting on Deshaun Watson. And, to get an email from Jodi Kantor, hey, I listened to your daily episode where and I wrote back immediately, like the only reason I or one of the main reasons I had like the confidence or like felt that you could actually do this kind of reporting was like because of your work. So I think there are so many great examples that like, I really would, use that as a blueprint and encourage you to do the same. When I get stuck on stories, sometimes I'll just read another piece, whether it's a feature or investigative thing, just to sort of remind you that like it can be done. And that's something that I've found helpful. And the other thing is also just like not being afraid. Cold calling is like never easy. But then once you do it and it's fruitful, like you remind yourself, and this is something I have to constantly remind myself that like, yes, but there are things you're going to do in this job that like you have to talk yourself up to. And that's okay. Like I still do that. I still give myself a pep talk before hard phone calls. That hasn't changed at this point in my career. But a lot of it's just like willing to do it, you know, like there's not really any secret to it. It's just like, I'm willing to make this phone call.
It's good to hear because I have to give myself a pep talk if I have to call someone, definitely. Katie, you have a question?
Hi, I'm Katie Ackerman. I'm a third year here. I just wanted to start by saying thank you all for being willing to like come talk to us like this. I know this is all really very, very cool for us all to have the opportunity to hear from you guys. But my question is probably mainly for Jenny. I actually listen, I'm a religious listener of the Daily. And so when I saw your name on the list of people who would be attending this, I kind of like fangirled for a minute. But I'm not a journalism major, but I've been a part of the Collegian for a little bit. And so I was wondering what it was like to major in something besides journalism and then going into that field as a career, and what helped you make that decision down the line and how you did it essentially.
Yeah. And just the first thing on the Daily, like the team that produces that, like they are like magicians. They like walk you through everything. Like I was so like listening to the Daily, I'm always like, wow, these people don't ever say, like this is perfect. But it's like, because they coach you, and it's like, it's not overcoach in that they're telling you what to say, but they really like help you make a good podcast episode every step of the way. Like I was very amazed by the amount of work that goes into that show on a daily basis. It's an incredible team. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I always tell people who are your age is that you don't have to have it all figured out. Like I definitely didn't, you know, I went to Penn State thinking I would get a PhD in science. That's what my older sister did. We had the same major. My parents were engineers. I think it's really hard sometimes to pick a major at 18 and think that this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. So if you like aren't sure what's next, like there's nothing wrong with that. Like I was not sure what was next when I was your age. And I just happened to stumble upon journalism, and it was something that I felt kind of like, this is something I could do every day, you know, comparing it to working in a science lab, which I felt like was really interesting, but like kind of isolating. And I liked, you know, talking to people and finding things out on a personal level. So I think whatever your experiences are, like journalism is something that will help no matter what field you go into, like learning to communicate with people, distilling down information to be able to like, have it make sense to the public. And I say the same thing about my science education. Like I apply that to my job today, fact finding, like sort of like the scientific method, like vetting, corroborating information. So, but I think journalism is such a great area to have experience in because it just can relate to so many different careers that you may choose. And so for me, that was the pivot. It was from science to journalism. But I think, you know, all of you getting experience working at the paper, like it's going to be something that you're going to find so valuable for wherever direction you go next.
Mike, Scott, anything to add to that?
One thing, that point about communicating is really so key. I mean, every area of my life, there are people out there who are basically incapable of stringing sentences together, whether it is a letter from my kid's school or a billboard that has typos on it. There's like lots of places with bad writing and communication. So if you can communicate clearly, you can find a job somewhere.
Well, and the other side of that is being able to ask questions. Like sometimes my wife, again, like whether it's going into school as like a PTA president or something like that, she'll say, okay, tell me what questions to ask. Like she'll tell me, here's what, I'm trying to find out, or here's what I'm trying to get. Like what questions should I be asking? And I don't think there are too many professions that teach you how to ask questions. Yes, like science teaches you how to form a hypothesis and test it and things like that. But to sort of get to, in sort of a way that can be very helpful to your daily life. I think like journalism is good for that. So whether you ultimately end up doing it as your career or not.
Definitely. We have like 9 more minutes left. If anybody else has any more questions, I definitely do, but I'm opening it up to all of you first.
I'll ask one to Jenny at the end.
Okay, cool. Libby, what question?
Yeah, I actually, I guess this kind of relates to what we've been talking about right now, but one of the aspects of journalism that I've found most like meaningful or important is the ability to like bridge the gap between media and the public. And I was wondering, or not bridge the gap, but act as kind of like a bridge, I guess. And I was wondering how you guys, your perspective on how this like accessibility has prevailed despite changes in the way media is consumed or the way journalism is received, because obviously there's been a lot of changes, like what Jenny said earlier with like monetizing digital journalism and stuff like that. Obviously things have changed. So how do you guys think like this accessibility has prevailed through journalism?
I guess we'll start on that. I think format has changed a lot, right? There's a lot more really practical service journalism where you break down those questions that Scott asked in that format. What's the question and what's the answer? And that's not easy to do on Deadline because it has to be a good answer. It can't be the answer that some of you cut and pasted from WebMD, when you're talking about COVID. It has to be real legitimate information that's been fact checked. So that's one way. I think another way would be, when I have to go back and look. When Jenny does a big investigation now, some people will read that. A lot of people will read that full thing, but we often at the Times will do a shorter takeaways version or something we call a burst, where you flip through the story on your phone. And so that's trying to reach different audiences who may not have time or may not be inclined to read the full thing, but can get some of that news as an entry point. So I think the format would be the one way I think things have changed for me the most.
I don't think this is exactly what you were asking, but it's along the same lines. So I mean, the three of us are really lucky to work at the Times where we, work alongside some incredibly talented like visual journalists who are able to do great graphics and data visualizations and things like that. But it also gives you the ability to sort of tell stories that you probably wouldn't have thought you could have told. So like I worked recently with a fellow who we hired to cover people with disabilities. And she herself is a child of deaf parents and has, severe hearing loss, and he's used hearing aids her whole life and things like that. And she wanted to do a story about how American Sign Language has been evolving, in large part because of the technology like we're using right now. I guess I'm sitting far enough away from the camera that if I did a big sign like this, you'd be able to see it. But normally you're sitting like much closer to the camera. So if I did something down here, you wouldn't be able to see it. So for instance, like I just did the sign for dog, the traditional sign for dog, which you can't see. But now they've changed it. So this is the sign for dog. And so she wanted to do a story about how that was happening and how, that was creating like sort of a generational gap between users of the technology and those who grew up with the more traditional sign language. And we were able to sit down with, a couple of like great visual specialists at the Times and come up with a way to tell this story largely through videos of people signing in old and new ways and comparing those and things like that. And, that's the kind of story that, I don't know that you could have told it in print, first of all. Ultimately we did do a print version of it, but it kind of relied on what we were able to do through the video and the visuals and things like that. And it just, the creative ways that you can do things now are just like sort of tremendous, particularly when you're lucky enough to have colleagues that you can like call on for those types of things. So I think that, we're just able to tell very different kind of stories than we ever could before, and through that to write about communities or issues or ideas that might not have gotten the type of attention or coverage that they deserved in the past.
Jenny?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because I feel like this is kind of the challenge for news organizations today is to figure out how to still have that same connection with your audience when people are consuming it in different ways. And I really think the Times has been a model for that. I think that the Times has figured out ways to bring in different audiences, whether it's through like the cooking app or through, the games app or Wirecutter. And then you have those people who are used to coming to the Times and may read other headlines. I mean, I think the app is tremendous. There's obviously a robust and really popular podcast platform. I mean, when I worked at Sports Illustrated, like we didn't have an app. Like we had a website that was like pretty non-functional, and those things were like definitely impeding our ability to, it's so frustrating. You work so hard on a story and you just don't think it's getting to people because the delivery mechanisms aren't great. So I think figuring out a lot of platforms, making it accessible to a lot of people who care about different things, are in different parts of the country or the world, have different routines. I think that is, essential. And that sort of ties into what I was saying before about like being willing to deliver the news in a lot of different ways. And it doesn't always look like, a story in a newspaper. Sometimes it's like Mike said, like the first time I had to do a burst at the Times, I was like, what is this? This is kind of weird, but like they're really popular. Or we go live a lot. Like that's been a big focus of the Times since I've been here, is like going live on big stories where you're just posting updates as they come in, and people really engage in that. Like I couldn't believe the number of people who engage with our like Super Bowl live coverage. So I think, and that was actually, I was just typing in the chat an answer to Megan's question, but I think the best advice that I've ever received is sort of to be nimble, and that can be in how you deliver the news and how the landscape of media changes. And also, especially when you're covering a story, like if the story changes because you learn something new, don't stick with your original, idea. Like you have to go with where the facts lead you and be willing to adjust and rewrite and go in a different direction.
I know Mike answered Megan's question in the chat. We all have a couple more minutes, but Scott, any answer, or Mike, anything to add to that?
Well, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Let me say, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received in journalism?
Oh, you can write on your arm if you have to, but always have a pen.
Or a pencil if you're in the rain.
That's true. Zach, I know you had one final question that you wanted to say before we wrap things up.
Yeah, it was basically, so I'm in another class, Com 170 by Mike Foreman. One of our projects this year, we have to create a profile of someone in the sports industry. And basically, we just have to interview them about their experiences, all the good stuff about your job and everything like that. And we're not allowed to duplicate anybody. I mean, I was wondering, like, could I do it on you? Would that be something you're interested? It's due like November 17th. So we have like 2 months that I could interview you for. Obviously, you don't have to decide now. I can email you or something. But I was just wondering.
No, I appreciate you asking. I'm happy to do it. The only thing I'd say is I think, yeah, I did Max last year. We spoke for a similar project. So I hope it's still okay that if there can't be duplicates in 2 different years. But yeah, happy to do it, Zach. My email is just like jenny.vrentas@gmail or at New York Times, either one. So
I can send it your way too. I have it. So
yeah, mine's zallen540@gmail. So just get that, and it's in your spam folder. It's not spam. But
Foreman likes those numbers in his columns. If you can do like a little by the numbers with Jenny, that would go over really well.
Yeah, no, I just figured since, I mean, you're here, it's better than just sending an email and you don't know who I am.
No, yeah, it's sort of the equivalent of Mike approaching the guy at the New York Times at the Poynter Institute, right?
Yeah, but
definitely like that.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Thank you.
I know a bunch of us have a lot of questions, but it's 7 right now. So thank you guys so much for coming and talking with us. I am incredibly grateful for you guys talking with us and letting me speak with us. I know everybody else is. Let us know if you have any final thoughts at all before we sign off. Definitely. Anybody?
Thank you for having us. It was great.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, this was awesome. It's always so great to connect with members of the Collegian. I like cherish my time there. I still have so many collegians. In my first apartment, I had them hanging up all over my wall because it was like such a special chapter of my life, and I didn't want to move on from it. So I'm so excited and jealous that you guys are getting to experience that right now. But it's always so nice to visit with current Collegianites.
Definitely. I wish we had more time, but this is our panel. So thank you everybody for coming. And I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you guys. This is wonderful, wonderful attendance and great participation from the students. And Scott, I'm trying to think because you've done at least one previous one. So hopefully we're getting there.
I remember you, Scott, from the one
Glad
of
to
them.
come
I think
back.
Mike, you've done one too. I'm sorry, I'm losing. I'm also a lump, so I'm giving my haziness to my
Yeah, always glad to. Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you guys.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you.